Hello and welcome into this edition of Locked on Wolves. Today we're talking all about the Jarred Vanderbilt signing, the re-signing, the Jordan McLaughlin re-signing, and kind of looking back at how the Timberwolves acquired each of these players, the value that they're getting on the contract. And then also I want to look into what are their roles going to be in the rotation? What does the Wolves 9-10-man rotation look like now? Are both players in that rotation? And will Jarred Vanderbilt even get a chance at starting this year? All that is going to be today on the show. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also the co-editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Had some technical difficulties on Monday, and so this episode got pushed to Tuesday. We're still going to do the Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday thing this week is the plan, provided no more technical difficulties. So welcome into the show. I want to talk about the Jordan McLaughlin and Jarred Vanderbilt re-signings on the show today, how both those came about, and also, what are their roles going to be in the rotation this year? So we're going to get to all that. Reminder here off the top, Tuesdays on Locked on NBA. Today is Tuesday. The podcast on Tuesdays on Locked on NBA is East Meets West. Wes Goldberg, Warriors beat writer for the Mercury News and host of Locked on Warriors, and David Ramil, host of Locked on Heat, tackle the biggest NBA stories of the day, coast to coast. Follow the Locked on NBA podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. And also a reminder, if you're not already following this podcast, you can do that anywhere you listen. And of course, that includes YouTube now as well. This is week 3 of YouTube. This is like episode, I think, 7 on YouTube. So if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. If you prefer to listen to your favorite podcast provider, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Google, of course, the all-new Odyssey app as well. You can listen anywhere, but even if you listen on one of those platforms, please help out with the subscribe on YouTube. It's a new channel, so that would definitely help us out. If you listen on Apple, go ahead and throw a review on there as well. That definitely helps us get in front of more folks as well. So today I want to get into the Jordan McLaughlin, Jarred Vanderbilt thing. And the news came down. This was a late Friday thing, if I remember. Yeah, it was late Friday that the news came. Jarred Vanderbilt, of course, is the bigger news. He had the bigger contract, 3 years, $13.8 million. It was first reported by Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN and followed just a few minutes, I think like 6 minutes later, but who's counting, by John Krasinski of The Athletic here locally in the Twin Cities, as well as Shams Charania of The Athletic in on the report. And then just a few minutes later, we found out Jordan McLaughlin had also re-signed. The Vanderbilt deal had to get done first, and then McLaughlin was both reported next and also was presumably done next, kind of in tandem, because it just depended on how many dollars the Wolves would have left after signing Vanderbilt, to be safely under the luxury tax. And the Wolves got them both done. So Vando gets 3 years, $13.8 million. He makes $4 million in each of the first 2 seasons of the deal. The third year has some incentives that could potentially be worth up to that $4 million, or excuse me, up to about $5.8 million. So the first 2 years are each locked in at $4 million. He's got some potential bonuses that appear to be somewhat unlikely to achieve in that final year, which could bring the final year's salary up to 5.8 and the total value of the deal to 13.8 million. But again, $4 million this year, $4 million next year for Vando. Jordan McLaughlin's deal is 3 years, 6.48. So basically 3 years, $6.5 million. The first 2 years are guaranteed. $2 million this year, little under $2.2 billion next year. And then the third year of J-Mac's deal is only partially guaranteed, and it's a team option. And so there's, I believe, a buyout or a small guarantee, and I guess not technically a buyout, but a small guarantee for the third year, and the team can opt out of his deal if they want to after 2 seasons. So in that sense, Jordan McLaughlin, and we'll get into this here in a minute, but a bargain for Jordan McLaughlin. Of course, was undrafted, 4-year player at USC, spent his entire first year in pro ball, out of college, playing in the G League and playing for a couple different G League teams. Played for the Timberwolves Las Vegas Summer League team in 2019 and earned himself a 2-way contract with a great performance there. Honestly, at the time, and this was actually right around the time I started hosting the podcast, when they signed him to a 2-way deal, I was surprised. I didn't think he looked outstanding in Summer League. I just thought he was a guy, maybe like a 4th point guard, G League type guy who'd get a shot at some point. But I didn't think he was worth the 2-way deal. And I was wrong. He was fantastic when he got his chance that season in the 1920 season. Early on in the year, his first stint, I think Jeff Teague was hurt, and believe it or not, it was only like a year and a half ago Jeff Teague played on the Timberwolves, which is crazy to think about. Jeff Teague got hurt. There were some other injury issues. Shabazz Napier was hurt as well. Remember the Shabazz Napier era, because I've somehow blocked all of that whole season, I guess, out of my mind, or the pre D'Lo acquisition, the pre Malik Beasley acquisition of the 1920 season, blocked all that out of my mind. But when those guys were out, Jarred McLaughlin got a chance that November, December in 19, and wasn't great. Got called back up after the first of the year and was really good down the stretch. That was the year that was, of course, shortened by COVID-19 in March. But leading into the season suspension, I guess, the disruption, Jarred McLaughlin was really good. And last offseason, I was genuinely shocked he didn't get a guaranteed deal somewhere else. Ends up coming back to Minnesota on another two-way deal. Of course, you're allowed to have two-way deals, or back-to-back two-way deals, one season and then the following. He's no longer eligible for a two-way contract with an NBA team. And this year, again, in restricted free agency, coming off that second two-way deal, he did not find a home. And the Timberwolves were one of the few teams left with any cap space, even though it wasn't much. And they always were going to have the inside track to re-sign him because he's a restricted free agent, and also because he's played here the last two seasons. The coaching staff knows him. They've helped develop him. The front office really likes him. Sure enough, he's back, and he will be this team's third point guard. And we'll talk about the rotation for J-Mac here towards the end of the show today. But really a bargain to get Jarred McLaughlin back, and a great story to tell for the Wolves, finding an undrafted guy out of the G League and turning him into a guy who now has a guaranteed deal. And that happened for Jarred McLaughlin after a year. And frankly, this year he wasn't quite as good as he was in his rookie season. I think it's fair to point that out. He was so good his rookie year, and just kind of okay this last year. He also, by the way, contracted COVID-19 during the season after he came to training camp late because the deal got done late. So he was, last season kind of maybe brought his value down a half notch. I don't know if he's as good as he played his rookie season. I think he's probably somewhere in between. And again, a topic for later in the show, but I think he's a solid NBA backup starting point guard and could be one of the better ones, certainly one of the better bargains league-wide. In terms of Jaden McDaniels, Jarred Vanderbilt, the Timberwolves acquired him as honestly kind of an afterthought publicly. Certainly not for the Wolves, because Gerson Rosas knew exactly what he was doing. Vanderbilt was an afterthought in the deal that brought Malik Beasley, Juancho Hernangomez to Minnesota. And that was, the same deadline that, of course, brought D'Angelo Russell. And at the time, everybody was like, oh, Omari Spellman, he's a great throw-in. Jacob Evans, all these other names that were involved. And Vanderbilt was maybe the least talked about name. And while I was honest about me underestimating Jarred McLaughlin a minute ago, I will toot my own horn here a little bit. I loved the Jarred Vanderbilt acquisition. I talked about it on the show at the time back in early 2020, just prior to the COVID disruption. I wrote about it on Dunky with Wolves quite a bit about how I thought Jarred Vanderbilt was a really sneaky under the radar pickup by Gerson Rosas. This Vanderbilt wasn't a salary throw-in. This was a piece of the deal that the Timberwolves clearly sought out. Keita Bates-Diop was sent to Denver at the same time Vanderbilt came to Minnesota. They had similar contracts. They both were second-round guys with second-round contracts. And Vanderbilt was, I think, had an extra year on his deal. Or I'm sorry, Bates-Diop, or actually, no, they were the same year. I'm pretty sure the same draft. But either way, Denver wanted to do this deal because they had extra depth, right? They weren't going to pay Malik Beasley. They weren't going to pay Juancho Hernangomez. And Jarred Vanderbilt wasn't going to crack their crowded front court. He had been hurt a lot, had spent time in the G League, had barely played for the Nuggets in the NBA. And so the Wolves said, hey, we'll give you a guy who's a little older, has a little more experience than Keita Bates-Diop for depth for your playoff run, and we'll take back Jarred Vanderbilt. And who knows if this was like a deal breaker. I doubt it was a deal breaker for the Timberwolves, or if this was just a, hey, by the way, while we're at it, could we swap these power forwards? Genius. Keita Bates-Diop played in the bubble for Denver, but then went to San Antonio in the offseason and was a two-way player with the Spurs last year. He's going to stick around in the league kind of as a fringy player. Jarred Vanderbilt now has a 3-year deal with $12 million guaranteed in his contract. He is a bona fide NBA rotation player, and we'll talk about his role in the Wolves rotation. But just for a second, we have to recognize how under the radar and impressive that acquisition was for Gerson Rosas, making sure that he acquired Jarred Vanderbilt as part of this deal. And at the time, it was underreported, it got lost, throughout COVID-19, the Wolves didn't play a game forever, and it wasn't really talked about until he started getting minutes last year, and people realized what he could bring to the table. And I want to spend a good chunk of the show today talking about that. And could Vando start? What's his role going to be for the Timberwolves in 2000, whatever year this is, 2021, 2022? And what could that role be? here moving forward for Jarred Vanderbilt. Before we get to, and then also Jordan McLaughlin today on the show as well. I want to do the same thing with him. Before we get to all that, though, let's talk about our fantastic new friends at Sweatblock. As we all know, there's a few things in life that simply are not fun to talk about. One of them is excessive sweating. You know the feeling. Very likely you've sweat through your shirt before for no reason. I know I have. It's definitely embarrassing. And if you're public speaking, if you're going to an interview, big speech, first date, perhaps, it might not be life or death, but there's certainly much worse problems, but it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And that's why I have started to use Sweatblock antiperspirant wipes, and you should as well. Sweatblock is stronger and more effective than most clinical antiperspirants. You simply add it at night before bedtime, go to bed. The next morning you wake up, wash, go about your day, and don't worry about sweat. Guaranteed. I know this sounds too good to be true, but you literally only have to use Sweatblock once, maybe twice a week. It'll keep you dry the entire time. No more pitting out, no more picking your shirt based on which one will hide sweat better. It's doctor created and doctor recommended and works for up to 7 days per use. They have a dry shirt guarantee. If Sweatblock doesn't keep you dry, you get your money back. Featured and tested on the Rachel Ray Show by firefighters, and it's been a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years. Over 13,000 reviews. Currently #1 in Amazon's antiperspirant category. You can wear what you want to wear. I'm telling you, it'll be your little secret to confidence. It's a must-have for your toiletry bag. Big presentation, hot date, important speech, interview, whatever it might be. If you or someone you love is dealing with excessive sweating, you have to check out Sweatblock. Get it today for 20% off at sweatblock.com with the promo code Locked On. You can also find it at Amazon and CVS. But again, the way to go is sweatblock.com, promo code Locked On for 20% off. Sweatblock.com, 20% off with promo code Locked On. Hey, let's also talk about DirecTV. Now that it's football season, I think a lot more people are really tuned into the multiple screens thing, as well as DirecTV, of course, Sunday Ticket. But does this sound familiar? You've got a device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You might be watching sports highlights on your phone, and maybe you've even got your neighbor's best friend's login for all the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream. It brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. The best part is that there's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. All right, let's go ahead and let's start with Jarred Vanderbilt. Is there a chance that Jarred Vanderbilt starts this year for the Timberwolves? I'm going to say yes. In fact, sitting here right now on September 14th, middle of the month, 2 weeks out from training camp, I think Jarred Vanderbilt is the opening night starting power forward for the Timberwolves. I think that he brings the defensive edge, the rebounding rate, the rebounding ability that the Wolves are sorely lacking, especially at the 4 spot. You look at last year's total rebound rate and defensive rebound rate on the Timberwolves. Karl-Anthony Towns, or actually total rebound rate, Ed Davis was #1 and led the team in rebound rate, of course, and played in 30-some games. #2 was Jarred Vanderbilt. He even edged out Karl-Anthony Towns in that category. Defensive rebounding, he was 3rd behind Towns and Ed Davis. Jarred Vanderbilt was 3rd in defensive rebound rate on the Timberwolves last season. He's really the only guy on the roster that actually outperforms his or I should say really performs up to expectations to rebound his position. For the most part, the Wolves have pretty average to below average rebounders for their role. Jaden McDaniels played a lot of 4, especially early last year when Ryan Saunders was head coach, and he did not rebound his position well. And that's to be expected. He's rather slight in frame, was a young rookie, a one-and-done player, being asked to play the 4 when he's probably more naturally a 3, and I think we'll see a lot more of him playing the 3 under Chris Finch than we did under Ryan Saunders. So it's not really a surprise that Jaden McDaniels struggled to rebound the ball. Juancho Hernan-Gomez was fine. He, of course, overall wasn't very good last year, but he's an okay rebounder. We saw too much of Jake Layman and Josh Okogie at the 4 early last season and the prior year under Ryan Saunders. Neither of those guys could rebound the 4 at even an average rate, and that left Towns to fend for himself. Late in the season, we saw a lot more of Jarred Vanderbilt at the 4. We also saw some Naz Reid at the 4. Chris Finch is more interested in playing big than Ryan Saunders ever was. And you go back and look at the team rebounding under Saunders, and it wasn't good. The Wolves were in the bottom 10 in the league in 2 out of the last 3 years in total rebound rate and defensive rebound rate, and the bottom half of the league all 3 of the last 3 years. And Karl-Anthony Towns is one of the better all-around rebounders in the game. It simply shouldn't happen. Vanderbilt brings that edge on the glass. He's not huge, right? He's a little undersized, but he's got a great wingspan. He's super athletic and he plays hard. And that combination is deadly when it comes to rebounding. It's super important. And on top of rebounding, just the overall toughness, the overall energy, the overall deflect. He actually led the team, believe it or not, Jarred Vanderbilt did, in steal rate last season. He was ahead of Ricky Rubio. 2.7% of the time that there was a possession, the ball was stolen by Jarred Vanderbilt. 2.7 was his steal rate. Ricky Rubio's was 2.6 last season. And it's not really that surprising. If you watch the majority of games that Jarred Vanderbilt played in, he has a high motor. There's a reason that the Timberwolves broadcast called him V8. There's a reason that nickname came out on Twitter, because his engine is always going. His motor is always going. Deflections, even if it doesn't show up in the box score as a steal, jumping passing lanes, making life miserable for the other team. He's not the quickest laterally. And Jaden McDaniels is a more switchable defender than Jarred Vanderbilt, to be sure. But Vando can at least hold his own against fives and bigger fours, whereas McDaniels struggled in those situations. And Vando can hold his own against some threes as well. So he is somewhat switchable at the four. He can block shots. He can get steals. He can rebound. Do all those things that complement Karl-Anthony Towns' game so incredibly well. Just to underscore this, and this, again, this shouldn't be surprising if you watched a lot of Timberwolves last year. Jarred Vanderbilt's number one pairing in terms of net rating was Juancho Hernan-Gomez in only 245 minutes. So relatively small sample size. And by the way, that means that Juancho is playing the three, which we saw a lot more of late in the season. And while Juancho's not on the team anymore, of course, it shows that Chris Finch is very likely to be playing Jaden McDaniels and other Torian Prince at the three next to Vanderbilt instead of playing these tiny lineups like Saunders used to do. His number two pairing in terms of net rating, Karl-Anthony Towns and Jarred Vanderbilt. And by the way, this was the second most deployed two-man pairing for Vanderbilt. Outside of Vanderbilt and Anthony Edwards, which by the way was also a positive net rating, they played, the Edwards and Vanderbilt pairing played 739 minutes together. Their second most frequent pairing was Karl-Anthony Towns at 470, which is obviously a lot less than the Edwards pairing, but a lot more than any other pairing. It was almost 100 minutes more than the third most frequent pairing for Vando this year. So at 470 minutes, Jarred Vanderbilt and Karl-Anthony Towns had a net rating of 5, an even 5. Outside of the Hernan-Gomez pairing, which is only a bit better at 5.7, Vando didn't have a better pairing. And it's, again, not surprising. It's the energy, the rebounding, the defense. And we know that Cat can carry the load offensively. That's obvious, right? He can carry any load offensively. But even with Vanderbilt being a non-factor and generally a minus on the offensive end of the floor, Towns is such a positive on the offensive end of the floor that those guys together were net positive. Offensively, Vanderbilt just isn't a good offensive player, right? He has no jump shot to speak of. He has poor hands. Probably, it seemed like once a game, the ball would clank off his hands for a turnover, a steal, or go out of bounds at least once a game. And actually, his turnover rate was really high. I don't have it in front of me, but it was really high last year for a guy who didn't have a high usage rate and didn't shoot the ball very often. But if the Wolves use Vanderbilt similar to how Finch used Josh Okogie, not how Ryan Saunders used Josh Okogie, but how Chris Finch used Josh Okogie late last season, put him in the dunker spot, let him hang out there, get a dump off pass. Sure, he'll turn it over once a game, but he should get 2-3 dunks or layups over the course of a game. Maybe you'll see him at the elbow in a horn set and roll into the basket. He's not going to be popping outside the arc very often. You're not going to see Jarred Vanderbilt outside the arc. The other thing that we will see him do, though, and one of the things that I think is an underrated skill that he's going to continue to develop, and we're going to see more and more of this this season and beyond, is he can run the fast break a little bit. He can rip down a rebound and go. His assist rate, really impressive. Middle of the pack. I think he was 8th on the team in assist rate last year for a guy who barely had the ball in his hands on offense, right? His usage rate was really low. Assist rate was 8th because he's a really good passer. He can actually initiate the break. He can rip down a rebound and run. He can find the open guy. He can, he's not likely to get to the bucket all the way himself. He got a little bit of an iffy handle still and not a good shot, right? Not great shooting touch. But because of his court vision, his athletic ability, and his ability to pass, he's effective in the open floor. And so running Vanderbilt with Towns is really effective. Sandwiching him between McDaniels and Towns, or between Anthony Edwards and the three. Now apparently a 6'6" Anthony Edwards, with the report that he's grown a couple of inches out there a couple of weeks ago. If 6'6" Anthony Edwards at the 3 and you have Jarred Vanderbilt at the 4 and Towns at the 5, that's a versatile trio. And then, toss in Malik Beasley, D'Angelo Russell, or Patrick Beverly, whoever's in the backcourt. That's a really good lineup. Vanderbilt will always be 5th. Whoever he's on the floor with, he'll be 5th in terms of offensive options in terms of usage rate. He doesn't need the ball in his hands. The Wolves need guys who don't need the ball in their hands, because who does need the ball in their hands? Well, I mean, how many guys are going to be expecting 15, 16, 17 shots a game? D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, Jaden McDaniels, as he develops his offensive game, is going to want to shoot the ball. So guys like Vando that are lower usage, great defenders and great rebounders, great energy guys are exactly what this team needs. And not only that, he's only 21, right? I mean, there's upside left for Jarred Vanderbilt. And if he takes a mini leap this year and another mini leap the year after that, the Timberwolves are going to have an absolute bargain on their hands. And you could not have drawn up a better defensive complement to Karl-Anthony Towns in a lab. Maybe if you were a couple inches taller. That's about the only thing I would do differently when it comes to Jarred Vanderbilt and the pairing with Karl-Anthony Towns. So all that to say, Vando, excited that he's back. I think he starts. The alternative is if he comes off the bench, you probably start Jaden McDaniels at the 4. But I think what you do by bumping McDaniels to the bench is you allow him to create, you allow him to do more initiation of the offense from the bench, along with some lower usage guys, right? Patrick Beverley's going to be more of a catch and shoot guy. Naz Reid, you don't really want to center your whole bench attack around Naz Reid, but obviously he can replicate some of what Towns does, so you can run similar offense. But like Josh Okogie isn't going to be, doing much offensively, hopefully, with the bench unit. So the benefit of putting McDaniels on the bench is now Vando and Okogie aren't on the same unit, and they're barely ever going to share the floor. When the Timberwolves are closing games, it's very likely McDaniels is your closing 4. Maybe it's Dorian Prince, maybe McDaniels plays the 3, depending on foul trouble matchups, etc. But Jarred Vanderbilt and Josh Okogie are probably not on the floor unless you have the ability to go offense, defense late in the game. Instead, you're going to be a lot more focused on McDaniels, who's more of a two-way guy at the 4, and Anthony Edwards, who hopefully becomes more of a two-way guy at the 3. Whereas Vando's your early game energy guy, Okogie's your off the bench energy guy, and you're kind of staggering the all defense, no offense thing with both of those players. So I believe Vanderbilt starts at the 4 this season. I think McDaniels comes off the bench and sees probably 2/3 to 3/4 of his minutes at the 3 and effective minutes at the 4 as well. I think McDaniels could still play the 4, but retaining Vanderbilt at the price that they did was a really great move by the Wolves. I think he's going to play a really big role this season. Okay. Next, I want to talk about the same thing with Jordan McLaughlin. What's his role going to be? Is he going to crack the regular rotation for the Timberwolves this season? So we're going to get to all that. First, though, let's talk about Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have a computer with access to rockauto.com, both at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the exact same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer. They have everything you could possibly need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil to even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, let's talk about Jordan McLaughlin. So J-Mac, first of all, incredible bargain. I talked already about it's too bad he didn't get guaranteed money somewhere. Well, I'm glad he's with the Wolves. It's too bad he didn't get more guaranteed money, or even for his sake, last offseason, find a home with another team that could give him like legit, hey, you're our backup point guard. You're going to play 18 minutes a game, whatever, maybe a fringe playoff team, something like that, to get him a little bit, a bigger salary than he got with Minnesota. That said, this, even though I feel bad for J-Mac, it's an absolute steal and a bargain for the Timberwolves to get Jordan McLaughlin at $2 million a year, 2.2 million next year, and probably only a little more than that in year 3 if he's retained for that team option on the 3rd year. Jordan McLaughlin's a legit top backup point guard in this league. I mean, if you line him up against every number 2 point guard on every roster, he's at least middle of the pack, if not higher. And most of those guys are getting paid a lot more than $2 million a year. Now, with the Timberwolves, of course, in front of him is D'Angelo Russell as the starter, Patrick Beverley, who, by the way, has never been a regular reserve for his career. He's always been a starter. He started the vast majority of his games. He's your backup point guard. You've also got McKinley Wright, who is a 4-year guy at University of Colorado, undrafted rookie, signed a 2-way deal. So he can only be in the NBA for a certain number of games this year, unless the Wolves end up promoting him to a full regular NBA contract, which seems unnecessary, especially now. So McLaughlin's your clear third guy. McKinley Wright's fourth on the depth chart. However, a couple things to point out. Number one, Patrick Beverley, for as excited as I am for him to play with the Timberwolves, he gets hurt a lot. Last season, he missed a huge chunk of the year. I think he played like 30-ish games. So he played like a third of the games last season. Go back 5 years, he's only played in about 61% of potential games for the Clippers and Rockets over the past 5 seasons, about 61%. So if he's going to end up missing 25, 30 games, which hopefully he doesn't, I think he had one season where he played over 75 games or something like that. If he can do that, great. If not, and the odds are he's going to miss at least 10, 15 games this year, Jordan McLaughlin's a really good fallback plan, right? Jordan McLaughlin is as good as you're going to do for a third string point guard. The second thing is that Chris Finch really likes to play multiple point guards together, multiple ball handlers, and Ryan Saunders did too. The D'Angelo Russell, Ricky Rubio pairing did not go according to plan. It came on towards the end of the season last year, but it didn't work out how they wanted it to. Well, Beverley is going to come off the bench, and Beasley and Edwards are going to start on the wings next to D'Angelo Russell. I think we're going to see some crunch time lineups, depending on the game, with Beverley and Russell together on the court. And if that's the case, at some point during the game, you're probably going to need a third point guard for a few minutes here and there to help spell those guys, maybe early fourth quarter. You maybe want them both off the floor. And so you run a McLaughlin, Malik Beasley, Josh Okogie lineups. You got a little bit of defense, a little bit of offense out there in your backcourt. And you can kind of mix and match a little bit. Now, McLaughlin's obviously not going to be out there during crunch time, but to use him third, fourth quarter to spell Russell and or Beverley to make sure that they're both available for your crunch time lineup, I think that's a really important thing without having a massive drop off. I mean, if you have to throw McKinley Wright out there, and they may have to at some point this season if somebody gets hurt, that's not a playoff team's not relying on a two-way player to be their 10th guy off the bench. They're just not. And so now that McLaughlin could be your 10th or 11th guy, you know that you're going 10, 11 guys deep. And that's not even counting Leandro Bolmaro. We'll talk more about him another day. And not from a point guard position, obviously, but from a sheer depth perspective, right? I mean, he's like your 12th guy right now. He was voted most spectacular player in Europe last year because he's an exciting young player who could do a lot of things. And now we're talking about real depth. And I'm not about to like sit here and say 1 through 12, the Timberwolves line them up against anything crazy like that. But look at the last few Timberwolves rosters and tell me if the Timberwolves have had a 1 through 12 this strong at really any point. I mean, the Jimmy Butler year, I mean, you had guys like, you had some reasonable rotation players towards the end of the bench, Cole Aldrich. But I mean, this was like end of the rope, or end of the road, I should say, Luol Deng. It was end of the road. John Lucas III was on one of those teams. I mean, those Tibbs teams weren't true depth. They were just kind of names that everybody recognized at the end of the bench. This is a truly deep team. I mean, we're looking at Josh Okogie as your 8th or 9th guy. Now, I think this is more an indictment on the teams of the past few years, but he was a starter, right, for the past couple of seasons for a good chunk of the last couple of years. And now he's your 8th or 9th guy. So if McLaughlin's number 10 or 11 on the depth chart, if he's playing on average 8 to 10 minutes a game, and some games I don't think he'll get in, right? I just don't think he'll play. In others, and inevitably when Beverley or Russell gets hurt, which again, I hope doesn't happen, obviously, but if and when it does, McLaughlin is a really, really good backup plan to all that. And it's fantastic that the Wolves got this done for the price at $2 million this year, 2.1 next year. And I think I've got it here. It could be up to 2.3 million in the team option in 23-24. So it's an absolute steal. And the Wolves have bought themselves some serious depth as well as some consistency with that third point guard position. And frankly, if Beverley and Russell play many minutes together, McLaughlin's going to actually have a pretty big role. And I think it's going to be game, how the games play out. That's going to dictate this a little bit. I mean, Jalen Noel may end up being the guy out of the rotation. If the Wolves like playing 2 point guards, if Finch likes doing that this year, it could be McLaughlin seeing those minutes and not Jalen Noel, depending on how things start out. So I want to cover on a future podcast, probably later this week. I want to really go through potential crunch time lineups because as important as the starting lineup is, who's closing games for you and what options does the head coach have? There's real options now. I mean, look at, we could have some fun / I guess commiserate about this. and I think I'm going to now that I'm talking through it. But crunch time lineups from the start of last season, the start of 2 seasons ago, Travion Graham, Shabazz Napier, some of these guys that were on the court at the close of close games, the Timberwolves should not have a problem this year with putting out a competitive 5 to close out a game. And that's the McLaughlin and Vanderbilt signings. Those are really important. If you're building a playoff team, the depth signings on reasonable contracts for a team that's basically capped out are really, really important. And the Wolves have really, I think, hit a home run with both Vanderbilt and McLaughlin at the prices that they signed each of them at. Okay, so later this week, I want to talk crunch time lineups. I want to get into some historical Timberwolves stuff as well, not just the miserable crunch time lineups that used to run the Timberwolves used to trot out there under Ryan Saunders and I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine what it looked like under like Kurt Rambis and Randy Whitman, but we'll look at some of that. Maybe not go that deep. I don't think anyone needs that. But how much better those lineups are going to look this year. So that'll be one of the things we do later this week. Of course, monitoring all the Ben Simmons stuff. There's not a whole lot else out there over the weekend, but keep an eye on that. And of course, if anything breaks, be on top of it with an emergency podcast as always. But that'll be the rest of the week. A reminder, if you're not already following or subscribed to this podcast, you could do that. This show is everywhere and it's free. That includes Apple, Google, Spotify, the all-new Odyssey app, YouTube now. Again, this is, I think, episode 7 on YouTube. So go check it out, and please subscribe wherever you listen. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. That's Locked On T-Wolves, don't forget the T, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that today's show is, of course, or I should say Locked On Wolves is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And also a friendly reminder that if you're not subscribed to Locked On NBA, Tuesdays on Locked On NBA, each day of the week, there's a different set of hosts. On Tuesdays, it's East Meets West with Wes Goldberg, Warriors beat writer for the Mercury News and host of Locked On Warriors. Also, David Ramil, host of Locked On Heat, that tackle the biggest NBA stories of the day, coast to coast. Follow the Locked On NBA podcast wherever you get podcasts. All right, that's all we have for you today on the show. We'll be back on Wednesday, so be sure to tune back in. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.